Doing a daily Bible devotional has been the best thing that I've done for myself. My time in the Old Testament only proves to me again and again and again that the heart of man is deceitfully wicked above all things. When I'm reading the New Testament, I read it within the context of when Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Everything in the New Testament is just an expansion of one of those two thoughts. Those are the two lenses through which I think with my mouth open as I read through the Old and New Testaments. Join me, won't you, for another adventure in Coffee, the Bible, and Page. Get your coffee and your Bible and join me, won't you? Greetings, salutations. Welcome to another episode of Coffee, the Bible, and Page. I'm Page, your caffeine-imbued host. Here's my coffee. In the beginning, coffee, low. It was very good. And it was. And it is. Well, welcome to another episode. Today we're going to continue talking about what we read in 1 Samuel. We're in chapter 13. Saul has been crowned king, and he is getting ready to go fight the Philistines in his first military campaign. And we're going to read something that frames his monarchy in a rather poor light. But it also brings us to a very important aspect of our lives as Christians, followers of God, and that's the value of worship. And we're going to talk about that for a bit. The big lesson I took from this when I was reading this and going over it this morning was a really foundational principle concerning why we worship and how we worship. But I'll let the story unfold and you make up your own mind. Again, realize this, I'm thinking with my mouth open here. This isn't a in-depth Bible study in the sense that I'm getting into the original Greek or Hebrew or Arabic. I'm not. I'm reading it, I'm thinking about it, and I'm talking myself through it. And I'm asking God, almost every time I'm asking God, what do you have for me today in this passage of Scripture? Even though this is something that happened thousands of years ago, is there something here from me that I can take on board today? And there is. So, let's get started. Chapter 13. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Now, real quick here. I did read an article that said that this first sentence is fragmented, that there are some discrepancies between a couple documents that they found containing 1 Samuel, and so they're not exactly sure what it says. And a lot of times, many times in Israel, in this time in history, when they give a big number like Israel, he reigned over Israel 42 years, it's just their way of saying he reigned a long time. They don't know if he really reigned 42 years or not. So I hope that doesn't crush anybody, but they're not exactly sure what this first verse says. There's some pretty good analysis and guesswork involved, but we're going to leave it as it is here. This is the most accurate reading of it, I think, that we can find. Saul was 30 years old and became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah in Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. Now, Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. Then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." So all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become obnoxious to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. Now the Philistines assembled to fight Israel. with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. And when the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that the army was hard pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. You see, Samuel, in chapter 10, had instructed Saul to go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, but you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you're to do. But Saul did not wait for Samuel. So he said, Saul, that is, bring me the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to greet him. What have you done? Asked Samuel. Saul replied, well, when I saw the men were scattering, and ye did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. You have done a foolish thing, Samuel said. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Later, Samuel would tell Saul, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. Saul, it would have been better if you had obeyed, even in the face of what looks like disaster. That the Lord delights in obedience. And you see, Saul's sin was not that as king he was forbidden by God's law to offer these sacrifices. David's done it. David did it. Solomon did it. And there's no hint of divine rebuke in either of their cases. Saul sinned because he disobeyed God's words to him through the prophet Samuel, a sin that he would commit again. I get the sense that Saul looked at the sacrifices as a magic pill, as a part of the process to ensure victory. Much like the Israelites thought when they took the Ark of the Covenant into battle against the Philistines earlier, thinking that the presence of the Ark was enough. It wasn't about God. It was about the thing that represented God to them. That's not faith. It's magic, sorcery. It's like Saul was thinking, Samuel's not here, so I got to burn the animals, offer the sacrifices, and then we can have victory. God needs these cows burnt in order to give us victory. In order to get God to give us victory, I've got to sacrifice these cows. You see how that works? It's not Saul talking to God and obeying God. It's Saul saying, I've got to do these sacrifices to ensure that God will help us get the victory. But there's more here. In ancient Israel, rituals associated with the holy war, a war that you were called by God to fight, they were not to be performed by a king unless a prophet was present. Saul acted without the presence of Samuel, God's mouthpiece. And in both cases, his transgression was related to a holy war ritual, a war that they were called by God to wage. It's for these offenses he was rebuked by Samuel and rejected by God. Well, Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah and Benjamin, and Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600. He'd gone from thousands down to just 600 men. Now, Saul and his son Jonathan and the men with him were staying in Gibeah in Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 detachments. Again, this is a sound military maneuver. You split your army into 3 detachments. It increases the odds of victory. and you can do pincer movements. You can surround your enemy, etc. One turned toward Ophrah and the city of Shual, another toward Beth Horon, and the third towards the borderland overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the wilderness. Now, here's the reason why probably many of the men left the army and left Saul. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So in all the raiding and domination of Israel, Philistia had removed anybody who was a blacksmith. So there was nobody in Israel who could make swords or spears. So Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plow points, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 of a shekel for sharpening plow points and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening forks and axes for repointing goads. So on the day of the battle, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or a spear in his hand. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had them. Now, a detachment of Philistines had gone out to the pass at Michmash. All right, and that's where this chapter ends. Here's the thing that I got out of this chapter. Saul was rebuked by Samuel because of what he did in offering those sacrifices. I get the sense, again, that Saul thought, these animals need to be sacrificed so that we can get victory. You get the sense that Saul thought maybe he could manipulate God into doing what Saul wanted, which was to save his army. His motivation might have been good, but his view of worship was not. Our worship of God must come with no strings attached. If you bring your worship with the thought that God owes you something because you did something for him, that's not worship, it's sorcery. And sorcery, by definition, is your attempt to coerce some supernatural entity to do your will, to do your bidding. I've seen people who bring sizable monetary offerings to the church, but then demand that the money be used for this thing or that thing, whatever it was that they favored, a new wing for the church or a new facility, a new program, whatever. That's not worship. That's not presenting an offering. Our worship must have at its foundation the realization that we are totally without merit in any part of our lives, that we exist, that we breathe every breath solely through the mercy and grace of God. We have no right to demand anything from him. We worship to exalt him, not us. The actual physical act of worship itself has no value. What gives that act of worship validity is the humility in the heart of the worshiper, not the thing the worshiper is doing. We see in the Gospels where Jesus sees a woman bring, I guess the equivalent of 2 pennies and puts it in the offering at the temple. And we saw another wealthy person bring a big bag of money and put it in the offering temple. And Jesus' teaching on this was, he says, that woman gave more than he did because she gave everything. Her act of worship consisted of her giving everything to God. Where he says that wealthy man gave out of his excess. It didn't hurt him to have that money taken out of his account. That woman gave everything. Her worship was genuine. The other, not so much. You know, I'm thinking of there's a poor man in the temple, and he was bowing, prostrating himself, saying, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. And then there was another wealthy man standing nearby and says, oh, I'm so glad I'm not like that man. Lord, thank you that I'm not like that poor person. You know, that's not worship. That's self-centered. I get the sense that Samuel saw that Saul was trying to preserve his place as king, trying to take charge of the situation, letting the people see a king that takes charge. And so he went through the motions of doing the sacrifices because, gosh, isn't that kind of what the people expect? I'm a king. I should be doing something. So I'm going to offer these sacrifices, and then God will ensure victory. That's not worship. Again, I'll repeat this, and with this I'll close. Our worship of God must be with no strings attached. Don't think that you are worth so much to God that you can tell him what to do. Don't think that if you give an incredibly generous gift to somebody or a church, that guarantees you anything from God. The act of worship, the definition of worship, is you declaring the worthiness of that person you are worshiping. God is worthy of our worship. But we are not partners with him in the sense that we bring equal equity to the table. It isn't God and us that does things. It's God that does things. And if we are participants at all, it's through his mercy and his grace. I'm a talented musician. But without God, all that talent means nothing. And when I offer it up to him, it's with the realization that I can only sing because he's given me the voice with which to sing. I can only play guitar because he's given me the hands and the skill to play guitar. I don't play guitar to get anything from him. I don't participate in the worship community at my church to get anything from God. He doesn't owe me anything. My worship with God is with no strings attached. And sometimes the truest test of your heart when it comes to worshiping or doing an act of worship is, are you willing to do this thing, whatever it is, and have nobody recognize that you were involved? I used to work at a church as a staff musician. Wonderful church. Still is a wonderful church. I love that church to this day. But I would have people come up to me after a Sunday service, and I know they meant well, but they would say things like, wow, you were really ripping it on the bass today. Wow, that was really great. Man, I love watching you play bass. Man, you're really good as a bass player. And my outside voice, which is what everybody hears, thanks them kindly. Thank you. Those are very kind words. I appreciate that. But inside, I grieved. And I would say, my inside voice say, you're missing the point of worship. And I would grieve because apparently what I was doing was not leading them closer to God, leading them closer to me. And I saw the danger in that. Later, God called me to move on from that church to another church. There was nothing ugly that happened. It was a set of circumstances. And I came to a church where I was just one of a group of musicians. I don't stand out from the other musicians. There's other great bass players in this church. I'm not the guy. I'm not the big fish in the pond. I'm just a player. And I sit in the background and I play. And I watch people worship. And I'm anonymous. To most people in that church, don't know my name. People in the worship community do. But I'm not a big deal. And I like that. There's danger in being a big deal. You get to think that perhaps you're important enough that God might do stuff for you. Hope that's not the case with you. Again, our worship of God must be with no strings attached. And I'll read this one last sentence, and then I'm done. Our worship must have at its foundation the realization that we are totally without merit in any part of our lives, that we exist, that we breathe every breath solely through the mercy and grace of God. We have no right to demand anything from him. We worship to exalt him, not us. The actual physical act of worship itself has no value. What gives the act of worship validity is the humility and heart of the worshiper, not the thing that the worshiper is doing. I think that's a lesson that Saul needed to learn, and that's the lesson I needed to be reminded of, and I hope that speaks to your heart as well. All right, I'm done. Here's my coffee. You know what? The coffee's still good. I'm Paige, and I'm out of here. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
So, what did you think about today's Bible devotional? Email me and let me know your thoughts at ffog@me.com.